This is a Santorini earthquake update for the 22nd of February 2025. The fall in the number of earthquakes seems to be leveling out far above the normal level, and the rate of fall in earthquake intensity is also leveling out, and this level is also around double what we would normally expect. In this Santorini earthquake update, we'll take a standard look at the earthquake frequency and intensity over the past 90 days, and we'll also do it in a bit more detail, and we'll look at the past 7 days. We'll take our usual look at seismographs from Aegean Island, and then we'll revisit the tide connection theory, and we'll dig into some actual scientific research on seismicity in general. And I think this research is very important for people to see, especially people in the southern Aegean. As always, this video is based on an article on strikeengine.com. Link in the video description, and in that article there is links to all the information sources that I use for this video. So starting off with the cumulative and frequency earthquake data. First, a quick look at the 90-day trend to illustrate what I've just highlighted. So 90 days, first of all, the blue line for cumulative energy release is leveling out at a point which is about double the normal energy released in the South Aegean Sea. Earthquake frequency is also showing the same trend, i.e. leveling out above the norm. Digging into the 7-day data, we get better resolution here on this graph. We get it by the hour, so we've got 7 days along the bottom, and that's broken down into segments during the day. On the cumulative energy front, we see that the data is not being skewed by any big event. We're not seeing yellows or oranges in this area. It's very, very consistent. And likewise for earthquake frequency, we're not seeing like a big column here with low columns next to it. It's all pretty consistent. All in all, I think we can say we're looking at constant underlying activity, which I think is also fair to say may not be being driven by fault movement. And then we'll come on to the seismograph data from Aegean Island, our favourite seismograph station. Image on the left is from yesterday, the 21st. Image on the right is today, the 22nd. And I would say that both graphs are very, very similar, both for the roughness of the lines and for the frequency in the big spikes that we're having. I'd say they look very, very similar, incredibly so. And I think this confirms exactly what we saw above in the cumulative data. We are looking at, in the southern Aegean at the moment, constant activity of low intensity. We'll just have a quick look at island movement, again using the GNS data. EOS first, the north movement is still constant. Westward and upward movement both seem to be slowing. Santorini, the north movement is continuing to slow. East movement appears to be at a constant speed, but the downward movement is continuing to accelerate. Let's have a quick look at that. So these are the latest plots. Like I said, the north movement, it looks like it's leveling out. The easterly movement, I would say the trend is probably pretty straight here. But the downward movement, again, today's point again is, it looks to be accelerating. Coming on to Aegean Island, southern movement speed looks to be stabilizing, as does the speed of the western and uplift speed, so everything is stable there, no changes from yesterday. Then we come on to tide data. Are we seeing a potential connection between the tide coefficient, difference between the high and low tide, and earthquake activity? This is something I covered in, I think, the day before yesterday's video update, so that's probably going to be the 19th. I'll link to that in the video description. So I'll do it a bit different today. The last one I did it over 90 days. Today we'll look at it on the 7-day graphs. We can see the overlay here. At the moment, the tide coefficient, the difference between the high and the low tides is very small. And we're seeing this low constant intensity. It's not continuing to drop. As the tides are stabilized, so has the frequency and the intensity of the earthquake. So we could still potentially be seeing a connection. So the next section is titled If. Alright, here I'm prefacing the next section with the biggest possible if. If there is a connection between the tides, i.e. the pull of the moon and the sun, what can we expect in the coming days? Perhaps starting as earliest as the 24th, but probably the 25th onwards. I think it's possible that earthquake activity could start to increase again. By how much, even if it does happen, is anyone's guess. and I can't say there'll be any correlation between the size of the tide and the earthquake intensity. It's just possible that we might see earthquake intensity increase as the tides start to increase. Even if it doesn't happen, I still think it's worth keeping an eye on the tides. It doesn't cost us anything, you know what I mean? We have nothing to lose by doing so. Having said all that, I've written here a friendly recommendation, a preface to what I'm about to say. I think the chances of anything happening are extremely low. Having said that, if I was in a position to maximize my insurance, I would say the following. If I were a resident in the area of the earthquakes and I had already evacuated the area and I was thinking about coming back in the next day or so, I think personally, and if I was in the position to do so, I would delay my return until at least the 26th of February, and I could add myself an extra 0.0001% layer of insurance. If I was already away, I'd delay my return. I mean, why not? Let's see what happens when these tides change. And if I hadn't evacuated, and bear in mind I am not in the area, I think personally I would just be cautious. I've put a link here to earthquakes.gr. Let's just have a look here and see what it says about caution with regards to earthquakes. I think it's a relatively decent and sensible, well no, it is a decent article and it's very sensible. So what do I do before, during and after an earthquake? So before an earthquake safety is more than minimizing damage to buildings. We must also secure the contents of our buildings to reduce the risks to our lives and pocketbooks. It says here several people died and thousands were injured in the Northridge earthquake because of unsecured building contents. This is very relevant to me. I have got bookcases in places that could fall on me when I'm sleeping. So if I was in that area where there's a lot of earthquakes happening, I would be fixing these problems, i.e. secure the contents of your house so you can't get injured by it. Like I said, loads of good advice. I'm not going to go through it all. The link is in the Strike Engine article. It's well worth the read. And then we come on to the research on the tide-earthquake connection. I say here, when I did that first video on tides, I presumed that the general consensus among experts was that tides play zero role in seismic activity. But I've looked into it in a bit more detail, and I think I may have made a mistake there. So what I've done now, or what I've done in the rest of this article, is I've linked to research papers. So I'm just going to go through some of the highlights here, the key quotes that they have in these papers. I haven't read them all the way through, every one, but what I'm listing are the ones that seem interesting and are easy to read. So let's get started. First of all, we'll look at articles, science research papers that deal with the earthquake-tide relationship. So the first one, a review of tidal triggering of global earthquakes. This one's easy to read. I think it's kind of a meta study. It looks at many studies and brings all that data together to come to some sort of conclusion. And I think the authors lean towards there being a connection, but they also highlight that there is also research showing that there is no connection. I have said personally that there may be a connection between the tides and Santorini earthquake swarm. But having said that, I've also looked at the Campi Flegrei earthquakes that are in Naples at the moment, and I didn't see any connection there. So in short, I think sometimes the tides may be an indicator, sometimes they're not. You have to look at the data for each situation and location. Maybe some locations are more susceptible than others. That is the conclusion, I think, from this first article. Next one, tidal sea level fluctuations trigger earthquakes. This paper looks at the quakes around the Sea of Marmara. A quote from the article, for this time in this region they documented a strong effect of the Sea of Marmara water level changes on the local seismicity. One thing I would pick out from, at least from their initial introduction to this article, is they are focused on the sea levels being the driver. I think they may be missing the point that they should be looking at what is the cause of the sea level rising, i.e. the moon and the sun, and perhaps that is the driver, not the sea level. I say this is important because the tides in Santorini are generally not very big, but that does not mean that the force of the moon and the sun is any less there than there is in the Bay of Fundy, for example. Next link is to earthquake forecast models based on earth tidal correlation. An article that says there is no correlation, at least in the areas they sampled and at the times they sampled. So I put that in there for a bit of balance. Next one, monitoring tides could predict major earthquakes. A quote from the article: tidal quakes happen more frequently in the run-up to bigger quakes, suggesting stress had built up year on year. Another article that focuses on sea movement and not the driver of sea movement, i.e. the moon and the sun. And it also stresses that tides are not the primary driver between seismic activity. Next one: can astronomical tidal forces trigger earthquakes? Quote from the article: but in the past 20 years, some studies have suggested that this long suspected phenomenon might actually be real. The most recent of these was published in February. Researchers from the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki in Greece, who analysed records for more than 17,000 earthquakes that struck the south of that country between 1964 and 2012. Rather than occurring at random intervals, the quakes seem to be related to oceanic tidal effects, the team found. And then I come on to the paper that this one is referring to. Evidence of tidal triggering on earthquakes in the Hellenic Arc, Greece. Like I said, this is the one that's referred to here. These results are in favour of a tidal triggering process on earthquakes when the stress in the focal area is near the critical level. This obviously is extremely relevant to Santorini because they are specifically talking about this, the southern Aegean, and they're specifically talking about the tides in the area having an effect on earthquakes. So, like again, extremely relevant to Santorini. Well worth checking this out. Next one: a review of tidal triggering of global earthquakes. Quoting from the article or this study: in this study, publications concerning the tidal triggering of earthquakes were compiled and analysed with regards to global earthquakes, which were classified into three main types: tectonic, volcanic and slow earthquakes. The results reveal a high correlation between tectonic earthquakes and tides. So this is, I think it's fair to say, what we're dealing with in the South Aegean. Mid-ocean ridges there, or a mid-ocean ridge there possibly. Next one: correlation between seismic activity and tidal stress perturbations highlights growing instability within the brittle crust. Quoting: our analysis provides new insights about the features of impending main shocks which are proposed to emerge from a large crustal weakening preparation process whose duration depends on their seismic moments. This quote here is potentially worrying for the Aegean at the moment. I think it's fair to say that over the last few weeks we may have seen large-scale crustal weakening. Next one: can the position of the moon or the planets affect seismicity? Again quoting: earthquakes are equally as likely to occur in the morning or evening. Many studies in the past have shown no significant correlation between the rate of earthquake occurrences. However, several studies have found recent studies have found a correlation between earth tides caused by the position of the moon relative to the earth and some types of earthquakes. One study, for example, concludes that during times of higher earth and ocean tides, such as during times of full or new moon, which is what we're going into now, we're coming into a peak tide period, earthquakes are more likely on shallow thrust faults near the edges of continents and in underwater subduction zones. This is a USGS article, and it also covers something key which I think needs to be reiterated. The vast majority of the time, tides have no effect on seismicity. I think it's fair to say something else needs to be happening. Tides on their own are not a main driver of an earthquake. Something has happened, and then the tides are sort of amplifying or pushing things over the edge. Next one here: analysis of solid earth tides, implications for earthquake precursors. Spatio-temporal analysis from 1995 to 2004 reveals distinct patterns preceding higher magnitude earthquakes, offering valuable insights into long-term forecasting. It has been correlated with foreshocks that occur to the same spatio-temporal extent. In a nutshell, single spectrum analysis SSA of solid earth tides emerges as a promising precursor for long-term earthquake magnitude prediction. Next one: tidal triggering of earthquakes. Research has shown a robust correlation between small tidally induced forces and non-volcanic tremor activity. Next one: tidal modulation of plate motions. We review the data and show that lithospheric plates retain a zero horizontal component of the solid earth tidal waves, and their speed correlates with tidal harmonics. High frequency semi-diurnal earth tides are likely contributing to plate motions, but their residuals are still within the era of present accuracy of GNS data. Next one, tidal interplate lithospheric deformation of Earth. Recent analysis has identified several statistical relationships between tidal forces originating from the Moon and the Sun and the incidences of earthquakes. However, again, they're talking about the GNSS data. They do not adequately account for local factors that significantly impact how the crust responds to tidal stress, thereby impeding accurate hazard forecasting, i.e. they're noisy signals, the GNSS stuff. And the last one with regards to the earthquake tide connection is tidal drag and western drift of the lithosphere. Mathematical modelling suggests a role for tidal drag in polarizing plate motion. Basically, the tides, they can affect how the lithosphere moves. And then we come on to the ones that cover volcanic research, and I'm reluctant to use the V word around the Santorini earthquake swarm because I think the consensus is there is nowhere near enough data to support a hypothesis that says something will erupt down there. I use these links below in the name of completeness and to highlight that the seismicity in general can be affected by the tides, and not hinting that volcano eruption there is likely, because again, I think there's no data to support, there's not enough movement to support that idea at the moment. So with that disclaimer out the way, let's get into these papers. The first one, triggering of volcanic eruptions. A recent study of the Kilauea, I think you pronounce that, and Mauna Loa volcanoes in Hawaii show a weak but significant correlation of the earth tide maxima with eruptions in Kilauea. No correlation at all, though, was seen with the activity of Mauna Loa, as a result which serves to emphasize how individual the behavior pattern of very similar volcanoes can be. Again, I'll refer back to the southern Aegean, where I think there may be a connection between the tide and activity, and I've also looked at the Italian earthquakes at the moment, and I don't see any pattern there. So I think it depends on where you are on the planet. Next one, can tides influence volcanic eruptions? To understand this preference for erupting far away from neap tides, we have developed a new lumped parameter model that accounts for the deformation process of magnet reservoirs, a partially open conduit and a gas layer where bubbles accumulate between volcanic craters before being released. We demonstrate that this system, reservoir conduit gas layer, acts as an amplifier of tidal stresses, such that when a volcano approaches a critical state, the gas overpressure beneath the crater can reach up to several megapascals more during a spring tide, i.e. the big tides that we're heading into at the moment, than during the neap tide. This amplification mechanism can explain why volcanoes are sensitive to moon cycles. Next one, moon's weird pull could help predict deadly volcano eruptions. The current state of the field can be best summed up by the eye-catching paper published in January by Susan Ho, a seismologist with the United States Geological Survey. She had set out to answer an age-old question: does the timing of powerful earthquakes coincide with phases of the moon? The abstract ran to one word: no. Behind a paywall, unfortunately, and I add this for a bit of balance. Next one, tidal cycles could help predict volcanic eruptions. Just before a surprise eruption of New Zealand's Ruapehu, not sure how to pronounce that, volcano in 2007, seismic tremor near its crater became tightly correlated with twice monthly changes in the strength of tidal forces. A new study has found. The research published in the journal Scientific Reports suggests that the signals associated with tidal cycles could potentially provide advance warning of certain types of volcanic eruptions. And there's a few more in there as well to get your teeth into. So all in all, the research papers, the takeaways, the key takeaways from all of that: the vast majority of the time, tides have no effect on seismic activity. For tides to have an effect, I think the consensus is there also has to be something else happening first, and also some areas of the world show a correlation, others don't. Again, I use the Italian earthquakes and the South Aegean at the moment. One might show a correlation, the other does not. And then wrapping it up, Santorini earthquake update for 22nd of February 2025. The summary: Some of the links above suggest that the conditions we have been through over the past few weeks, i.e. the weakening of the crust due to earthquake activity, may cause the upcoming tides that we're going to see starting around the 25th have a greater effect than normal. On this basis, I don't think it would be bad advice to recommend people to take precautions during this period. Let's just see what happens. And again, I've linked back here to the that earthquakes.gr article about taking precautions. I didn't include the links to cause alarm. I'm just including them because I think it's important for people to be aware of what has been said by qualified people, and for people to make the most informed decision they can for their personal circumstances. And finally, let's not forget the facts. As the facts stand today, things are much better than they were over the past 3 weeks. And I don't think there's any concrete reason to say that things will not continue to improve. If you've got time, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe if you want more updates, look after yourselves, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.